Before we talk about Code Geass, we need to talk about two real men who were trying to solve the same problem in radically different ways. Martin Luther King Jr. believed that justice demanded moral discipline. If you fought hatred with hatred, you didn't defeat it, you extended its life. The method mattered because the method shaped the future. Malcolm X, especially in his earlier years, believed something far less comforting. When a system is violent, asking it nicely to stop is not righteousness. It is surrender. Power does not collapse because you appeal to its conscience. It collapses when it is forced to. Two men, two ideologies, one dream. Now here's the uncomfortable question that keeps people watching. Which one actually works? Because that question isn't historical. It's psychological. It's political. It's personal. And it sits at the core of Code Geass. Suzaku Kururugi and Lelouch v. Britannia are not just rivals. They are philosophical experiments. Both watched Japan fall to the Britannian Empire. Both grew up surrounded by humiliation, death, and systemic cruelty. Both decided the world they inherited was unacceptable. But from that shared trauma, they chose opposite paths. Suzaku believes you fix a broken system by entering it, by obeying its rules while slowly bending them toward justice, by proving that even within corruption, integrity can survive. Lelouch believes the system is beyond repair, that entering it only legitimizes it. That true change requires dismantling the structure entirely and rebuilding from its ashes. And here's why this matters. Most people don't realize they've already chosen a side in this debate. When you watch injustice unfold in the real world, your instinct either says, "We need to reform this carefully," or it says, "Burn it down." That instinct reveals more about you than you think. Suzaku's ideology feels morally clean. It aligns with King's insistence that the means define the end. Violence corrupts. Hatred corrodes. If you compromise your principles to win, what exactly have you won? There's something deeply attractive about that consistency. It offers stability in chaos. It promises that goodness itself is powerful. But Lelouch's ideology feels effective. It echoes Malcolm X's warning that systems built on oppression rarely reform themselves voluntarily. Waiting can become complicity. Obedience can become collaboration. And gradualism can become a mask for stagnation. Code Geass doesn't present this as a simple right versus wrong dynamic. It presents it as a tension that escalates. And the brilliance of the show is that it forces you to feel the appeal of both. Suzaku joins Britannia's military, the very empire that crushed his homeland. On paper, that sounds like betrayal. But in his mind, it is sacrifice. He believes that if someone morally upright rises through the ranks, they can influence policy, soften cruelty, and eventually transform the empire from within. It's slow, it's painful, it requires swallowing pride, but it preserves his moral framework. The question is, at what cost? Because reform from within demands patience in a world that is actively bleeding. Every day Suzaku waits for systemic change. Someone else suffers under that system. His adherence to legality forces him to participate in structures he knows are unjust. He must follow orders he disagrees with. He must salute leaders he privately condemns. And over time, the psychological strain begins to show. He tells himself that the long game justifies the compromise, that endurance is strength, that restraint is virtue. But the audience sees something he refuses to acknowledge. The system is not neutral. It is designed to absorb reformers and dilute them. The higher Suzaku climbs, the more he must adapt to survive. And adaptation in a corrupt structure rarely leaves you untouched. Lelouch watches this and sees cowardice. Where Suzaku sees strategic patience, Lelouch sees moral paralysis. He doesn't believe the empire can be persuaded into kindness. He believes it must be forced into collapse. And when he gains the power of Geass, he interprets it as permission, or perhaps destiny, to become the catalyst. Here is where retention deepens, because this is where fantasy meets fear. Lelouch is intoxicating to watch. He is intelligent, theatrical, decisive. He does not hesitate. He does not apologize. When he acts, the world moves, and that level of agency is deeply satisfying in a narrative landscape where most protagonists react rather than initiate. But the more control he gains externally, the more he loses internally. To dismantle Britannia, Lelouch must lie constantly. He must manipulate allies. He must treat people as pieces in a larger strategic puzzle. And every time he does, he tells himself it is temporary, necessary, strategic. The end goal, a liberated world, will justify the ugliness of the path. This is the psychological trap at the heart of revolutionary thinking. If the future will be just, then present cruelty can be rationalized. If the world will be better tomorrow, then moral compromise today becomes an investment, rather than a failure. The problem is that compromise compounds. Each decision that crosses a line makes the next one easier. Each sacrifice of innocence makes innocence less familiar. Lelouch does not wake up one day as a villain. He slides there, step by calculated step, always telling himself it is for something greater. And yet, we still root for him. That's the brilliance. We understand his anger. We feel the humiliation he carries. We see the Empire's brutality. His rebellion feels proportional to the injustice. He is not destroying a utopia. He is attacking a regime that deserves opposition. But opposition and corruption are not mutually exclusive. Suzaku's path, meanwhile, begins to crack under pressure. His belief in lawful change becomes harder to defend when those laws perpetuate suffering. He insists that violence is wrong, even when violence is the language of the state he serves. The cognitive dissonance intensifies. He must constantly justify why his obedience is not endorsement. And this is where the comparison to King and Malcolm X becomes more than surface level. King's philosophy required faith that appealing to shared humanity could awaken conscience. It required believing that moral clarity would eventually shame injustice into retreat. Malcolm X's earlier rhetoric rejected that optimism. He argued that dignity sometimes requires confrontation, not persuasion. Both positions carried risk. Nonviolence risked being ignored. Militancy risked escalating destruction. Suzaku embodies the first risk. Lelouch embodies the second. As Code Geass unfolds, both characters accumulate consequences. Suzaku's loyalty earns him power within Britannia, but it also binds him to its reputation. He becomes the Empire's symbol of legitimacy, proof that even the conquered can rise. Yet that rise is conditional. It depends on continued obedience. His moral purity becomes both his strength and his cage. Lelouch, operating as zero, becomes a symbol of resistance. To the oppressed, he is hope incarnate. To the Empire, he is chaos. The mask allows him to embody something larger than himself, but it also fragments his identity. He is constantly splitting into roles: student, brother, revolutionary, strategist. Maintaining the illusion requires emotional isolation. Isolation changes people. The deeper he goes, the more difficult it becomes to distinguish between the cause and the ego. Does he want justice for Japan, or does he want to win? Does he seek liberation or vindication? The show never lets us forget that personal trauma fuels his revolution, and trauma, when mixed with power, is volatile. There is a moment in every ideological battle where principles become secondary to pride, where proving the other side wrong becomes more important than solving the problem. Suzaku and Lelouch inch toward that moment repeatedly. Their rivalry stops being purely philosophical and becomes personal. This is what makes the narrative resonate beyond anime. Political movements fracture not just because of goals, but because of methods. People who agree on outcomes can become bitter enemies over strategy. The reformer accuses the revolutionary of recklessness. The revolutionary accuses the reformer of cowardice. Meanwhile, the system they oppose continues operating. Code Geass forces us to sit with that tension. If Suzaku had Lelouch's decisiveness, would he achieve faster change? If Lelouch had Suzaku's moral restraint, would fewer lives be collateral? The show tempts us with hypothetical syntheses but denies easy answers. And then it does something even more unsettling. It demonstrates that both paths, taken to extremes, require sacrifice that borders on self-destruction. Suzaku's commitment to legality eventually demands obedience to actions he cannot morally defend. Lelouch's commitment to revolution demands that he become the villain the world unites against. Both men lose pieces of themselves in pursuit of justice, which brings us back to the opening question. Which ideology works? Perhaps that is the wrong question. The more unsettling possibility is that neither works alone. Reform without pressure can stagnate. Revolution without restraint can tyrannize. King's movement succeeded not in isolation, but within a broader context that included more radical voices applying external pressure. Malcolm X's rhetoric evolved over time, growing more nuanced, more globally aware. Reality rarely conforms to clean binaries. Code Geass dramatizes that complexity through spectacle, but its core argument is psychological. It asks what kind of person you become when you dedicate yourself entirely to changing the world. It asks whether justice pursued through impure means can remain justice. It asks whether moral purity that tolerates ongoing suffering is truly pure. And it refuses to comfort us. By the end, Suzaku and Lelouch are not simply representatives of ideologies. They are cautionary tales about extremity. When identity fuses completely with mission, humanity erodes. When victory becomes everything, relationships become expendable. When justice becomes abstract, individuals become collateral. The tragedy is not that one was right and the other wrong. The tragedy is that both were right about something. And both were wrong about something. Suzaku was right that methods shape outcomes. Lelouch was right that systems rarely dismantle themselves willingly. Suzaku underestimated how corruptive power structures can be. Lelouch underestimated how corruptive unchecked authority can become within himself. So when we ask whether reform or revolution is superior, perhaps the deeper question is this: can you pursue justice without becoming consumed by it? Because Code Geass suggests that the real battlefield is not political, it is internal. And that may be the most unsettling answer of all.